Have you ever watched the green exit sign and believed it was speaking to you? It hung over the end of our hallway like a quiet promise. There's always a way out if you are willing to walk there in the light. I didn't walk that night. I sat at my desk in the open plan office, pretending the hum of the HVSC was concentration, pretending the glow of a half-written email was purpose. The city pressed its cheek against our windows and fogged them with late winter breath. Somewhere over the carpet, footsteps stitched themselves together and unstitched again. It was 9:14 p.m. when I learned how normal an office affair can look from the outside. How it can spend months wearing sweaters and small talk. How it can pass badges through turnstiles and leave no fingerprints you can hold in your hand. We had all been back on site for a year, long enough for the coffee to taste like coffee again and not survival. The company called it Return to Community. People called it RTO, so they didn't have to say how lonely they'd been. Relationships bloomed between monitors and quarter-zip fleeces and after-5 elevators. HR had a policy. We had online training. Everyone clicked the quiz until it stopped asking questions. I took the training seriously. Ava took it too. She smiled at the cartoon scenarios and said, "They make it look so easy to do the right thing." Her name is Ava Monroe. She is, at this exact second, both the woman I thought I would age beside and the woman whose laughter I'm trying not to measure across rooms. She works in our brand team. I run data for go-to-market. We met in the before times, when nobody knew which kitchen bowls were good for sourdough starters. We married in a courthouse with a judge whose tie was as sincere as he was. And we came back to work thinking we would be the normal kind of couple. The kind that keeps private things private and brings home leftover cupcakes when marketing wins an award. The exit sign didn't know any of that. It just shone green and waited to be used. My name is Caleb Finch. I am not a detective. I am a man who counts things for a living, customers, conversions, compounding churn, and then translates those counts into stories executives can argue about in meetings. The truth is that numbers are just rumors with better documentation. If you respect them, they respect you back. I have spent a decade learning what behavior looks like when it leaves a paper trail. Which is why, the night the exit sign spoke, I didn't go looking for texts or lipstick. I went looking for patterns. Ava's job put her near the brand director, a man named Lucas Rains, who wore his hair in a way that suggested a hairdresser had a recurring calendar invite with his ego. He was competent, charismatic, relentlessly available to be seen. He remembered names like a politician and borrowed ideas like a tourist. Loudly, apologetically, constantly. I liked him from far away, the way you like fireworks you don't have to clean up. Up close, he made me feel like I was failing a test I didn't study for. The first time something felt wrong, it was small enough to be merciful. Ava came home with a story about a brainstorm that turned into a late dinner. Her voice had the brightness of a person carrying someone else's mirror. She said Lucas was mentoring her. She said he saw potential in how she handled crisis comms. She said a lot of things that were probably true on their own. Together, they clinked like glasses in a room I hadn't been invited to enter. I am not proud of what my mind did next. It began to inventory, not to spy, just to notice. The way Ava's phone started sleeping face down, as if it needed the dark. The way her calendar described long meetings with short words, sync, debrief, touch base, that somehow lasted past sunset. The way Lucas learned to say my name with a fondness that did not belong to him. The way their laughter found each other down the hall like two magnets pretending they were just being polite. I told myself stories. We all do. The first story I told was that I was jealous in an old-fashioned, unflattering way. and that modern marriages are better than that. The second story was that I was protecting our dignity by not asking questions I couldn't prove. The third story was that good people can be clumsy and still be good. Sometimes all three stories can be true while also being useless. The fourth story, the one that mattered, started when Ria Patel from Internal Audit came to the Wednesday stand-up to talk about expense compliance. Ria presented like a violin. Clean, restrained, precise. She said there was noise in meal reimbursements and inconsistencies in client coding. Nobody laughed? Ria asked us to double-check policy adherence, especially for events that included vendors. Lucas nodded with the empathy of a man who never met a policy he couldn't charm. Ava scribbled in her notebook and drew a small heart beside the word compliance, which I chose to believe was a joke until later. When it turned into foreshadowing, I couldn't unsee. RTO did something strange to us. It taught us how to be seen again. Some people discovered they were better at being seen than being good. HR tried, in that thoughtful, slow way policies try, to keep everyone safe from the parts of ourselves we negotiate with in elevators. Miriam Cho, our HR lead, sent a message reminding us about the personal relationships policy, which sounds like a soft couch, but is mostly a list of hard edges. No relationships across reporting lines. No influence over compensation, reviews, or assignments. Disclose promptly. Reassign appropriately. Document everything. Miriam's email was kind and specific the way seatbelt warnings are kind and specific after a minor crash in the parking lot. I read that email twice. Then I read it again and felt my stomach pull a small knot in on itself. Because Lucas signed Ava's promotion cycles. He didn't do it alone, but his influence was a rumor you could watch happen if you stood in the right hallway at the right time. I was either going to be fine in a week, or I was building a case without meaning to. I did not want to build a case against my wife. I wanted to sleep. If you've never sat across from someone you love and asked for nothing, let me tell you how it feels. Like balancing a glass of water on your knee while a dog you don't own stares at you to see what you'll do. I said nothing on purpose. I did not touch her phone. I did not follow her. I did not weaponize the proximity that marriage gives you. I did the one thing people rarely do in stories like this. I opened the handbook. Policy is a map of disasters we bothered to learn from. Miriam's policy had a passage about real or perceived conflicts of interest. The way airplane manuals have a drawing of a seat cushion that might save your life, while politely insisting your life is still yours to save. The policy said, disclose. The policy said, don't supervise, don't influence, don't decide the fate of someone you are intimate with. The policy said, ethics hotline available, anonymous or named, to raise concerns without retaliation. I read it until the words lost their furniture and became wind. The hotline number lived on a lanyard card behind my ID badge. I had never called it. I could hear my father's voice in my head saying, "You'll be the guy who made a call he can't take back." I could also hear another voice, the one that sounded like me in a courtroom I had never visited, saying, "You don't have to accuse anyone of anything. You can ask a question about your understanding of the policy." So I did. I asked if a director mentoring someone whose assignments he influenced required a disclosure. The specialist thanked me. She gave me a case number that felt like a small metal lock clicking shut around a secret I hadn't decided to keep. The first artifact arrived 2 days later, not from the hotline, but from the company where truth prefers to live when it doesn't want to fight. The access control system. Security sent Ria a monthly feed of badge swipes and requested she run it against after-hours meal reimbursements to test a theory about misuse. Ria is not a detective either, but she has the patience of a librarian and the eyes of a hawk that filed paperwork to work indoors. She asked me if I could help her map anomalies. I was the data guy. I said yes before my fear could learn the word no. We took 3 months of badge logs and lined them up against expense receipts labeled client hospitality, vendor offsite, late creative sprint, and something called brand immersion, which is a phrase that should come with a towel. We weren't looking for names. We were looking for patterns, the kind that pull their own thread if you give them the chance. What we found first was innocent. People stay late during launches. People feed themselves. People are messy with coding. What we found second was less innocent. A cluster of late dinners charged to brand on nights when the building showed no client visitors arriving. The receipts were neat, the tips generous, the merchants consistent. A hotel folio appeared in the middle like a man who forgot his hat and came back for it. I wanted to miss it. I wanted to misread it. The folio had a room number and a corporate rate attached to a creative workshop that existed only in the kind of calendar nobody audits. The name on the folio belonged to a vendor rep we use too often, the kind of overfamiliar consultant who knows the receptionist by the name that isn't on her badge. Rhea coughed a small, unhappy cough. We'll need to ask compliance to request supporting documentation, she said. I'll keep this de-identified as long as I can. She looked at me the way someone looks at a window they don't want to open, because the wind will change the temperature of the whole house. Minor twist number 1 arrived wrapped in politeness. Lucas announced at all hands that he was formalizing a mentorship program with quarterly breakfasts for high-potential women across brand. He did not say Ava's name. He did not need to. People glanced at her anyway, the way you glance at the exit sign during turbulence. Minor twist number 2 came in the form of a Teams calendar that showed a recurring coach meeting in a conference room with no glass, booked by Lucas's executive assistant. The invitees were Yeva M. and L. Rains. The description was a string of motivational quotes that had suffered a head injury. I drank coffee until my heart misunderstood the assignment. After work, I walked with Ava past the lobby where the green exit sign hummed. I thought of asking something brave like, "Are we okay?" Instead, I asked if she wanted Thai or Italian. We ordered both and called it Fusion. She smiled like the world was soft and said we should try a new boutique hotel bar by the canal sometime, because the jazz there sounds like the color of warm bourbon. I wrote down the phrase warm bourbon jazz in my notes, because language is also a kind of evidence when you're trying not to be a poet about your own unfolding. The hotline specialist followed up. Had my question been answered? I said partially. She asked if I would be comfortable providing context to HR without naming anyone. I asked for Miriam by name. Talking to HR as a human instead of as a rumor felt like therapy for a conscience. Miriam listened. She did not ask for names. She asked about structure. She asked if I believed a power imbalance might be influencing assignments, if not compensation. I said I did not know. But the pattern of laid off-sites without clients made the exit sign hum louder in my head. Miriam explained the policy's spine. We don't police love, she said. We police leverage. If a relationship exists and influence exists, we reassign. If disclosure didn't happen, we investigate. She told me how disclosures were logged, time-stamped, reviewed, assigned to a case manager. If you're worried, she added, document timelines. Write what you saw and when. Don't speculate. Facts survive feelings. Her words were a railing I didn't know I needed until I leaned on it. I left her office with a kind of grief that felt like a good posture. Upright, steady, survivable. Minor twist number 3. Ava came home with a small silver bracelet I hadn't seen before and said it was a swag item from a vendor dinner. Minor twist number 4. The vendor was Capstone PR, a firm that had somehow been first in line for 3 consecutive campaigns without being the cheapest or the best. Minor twist number 5. Ria's anomaly map put Capstone's invoices next to the nights the hotel folio breathed. Patterns, when they start telling the truth, don't whisper. They clear their throat and ask for a microphone. I asked Ava how the mentorship breakfasts were. She said Lucas was generous with his time and connections. She said he'd amplified her in meetings. She said the program would help retention. She used the word retention like a badge she had earned. I nodded the way husbands nod when their mouths are full of rainwater and they are trying not to drown on camera. The first major twist didn't arrive as a text or scream. It arrived as metadata. Ria found a relationship disclosure form filed in the HR system at 2:07 a.m., backdated by 2 months. The form disclosed a consensual relationship between Lucas R. and A. Monroe, stated no reporting line existed, and claimed no influence over assignments or pay. The system, unromantic as a filing cabinet, stored the originating IP and the true timestamp. The backdating was an attempt at tidiness that looked, under audit light, like panic. Ria took the discovery to Miriam in compliance. Miriam called me, not as a husband, but as the guy who had asked about policy. "We are opening a formal investigation," she said. "We will handle this with care. Please don't confront anyone. Please don't gather your own evidence. We'll request access logs, expense backup, vendor scopes of work, and we may interview witnesses." Her tone contained the kind of mercy that can live inside a rule book. I thanked her. Then I went to the kitchen and washed a single glass for 10 minutes, like I was auditioning for a role where grief has excellent cuticles. I didn't sleep. The city didn't either. The exit sign floated in my head like a green moon pulling on the tide of my restraint. By morning, I decided what kind of man I would be. I would not be a screamer. I would not be a detective. I would be a witness. Witnesses get remembered kindly in certain rooms. Investigations, when done correctly, are boring in a way that saves lives. Compliance sent notices that sounded like elevator music, but meant business. Lucas and Ava were placed on paid leave to preserve integrity, while HR and audit worked. My phone buzzed with colleagues pretending they didn't know how to ask for gossip. I wrote back, "We wait for the process." In return, I received emojis that believed in me more than I did. Miriam interviewed me. She kept the questions small and the room warm. Did I have direct knowledge of any policy violations? I had awareness of patterns, not direct knowledge. Had Ava discussed a relationship with Lucas with me? She had discussed mentorship and dinners. Did I feel safe? Yes. Did I want support? I surprised myself by saying yes. She connected me with the Employee Assistance Program. The therapist on the other end of the line sounded like a person who had built a raft out of quiet and invited me onto it. Ria requested copies of receipts and backup for the Capstone PR invoices. Capstone sent clean PDFs and even cleaner emails. Ria asked for raw data exports. Minor twist number 6. 2 receipts from the same night with exactly the same tip amount to the cent. A statistical event that prefers fiction. Minor twist number 7. A scope of work that included creative workshop room, billed through a hotel that was not on our approved vendor list. Minor twist number 8. Calendar metadata showing RSVP accepted from Lucas and Ava to an event that didn't appear on any public company calendar. The second major twist landed with the weight of furniture. Badge access showed Lucas using his master badge to open a conference room after midnight on 3 separate dates. The room was in a wing under light construction. Cameras offline for a week while the electricians argued with the future. The cleaning staff schedule placed Ava on the floor at similar times, swiping into the women's room, then out 20 minutes later. A story emerged that wasn't illegal, but it was loud with policy. Noah Keller called me that night. We went to college together. He is a journalist now, the kind who believes in 2 sources and a long walk. I told him I couldn't discuss it. He said he knew. He said he was calling as a friend. He told me about a story he once killed because the evidence would have been spectacular, but wrong. Then he asked how I was breathing. I told him, honestly, for the first time, that I was trying to learn to breathe with a smaller chest. Noah said something I wrote down. You can lose to love and still win to truth. They are different games. I thanked him. He told me I didn't have to become a better man than the one I already was, just because someone else had become worse than the one they promised to be. When we hung up, the exit sign in my head stopped screaming and started humming again. Miriam scheduled a fact-finding meeting. HR calls these hearings, which makes everyone sit up straighter. Dylan Archer from legal attended, his tie broadcasting a weather report of mild storms. Rhea brought binders that did not apologize for their thickness. Lucas arrived with a lawyer who wore cologne that could change opinions about pine trees. Ava came alone, which I only know because later she told me she didn't want to look like she had put the company on trial for catching her. The meeting summary I received afterward read like a recipe. First ingredient, the backdated disclosure and the true timestamp. Second, access logs and conference room entries outside authorized hours. Third, expense anomalies and vendor SOW irregularities. Fourth, conflict of interest risks, where Lucas influenced assignments and performance reviews for a person he had an intimate relationship with. Fifth, prior training acknowledgments and policy sign-offs signed by both parties. It is difficult to argue with a recipe that includes the oven already being hot. Lucas attempted executive sincerity. He said the relationship was consensual. He said the mentorship was real. He said the hotel folio was for a brainstorming room because the office was under construction. Rhea produced construction schedules and photographs of the office not being under construction. Dylan asked about the backdated disclosure. Lucas said a paralegal had advised him, then looked at his lawyer as if paralegals grew on trees that had stopped loving him. Ava spoke softly. She said she had been unhappy. She said she had not intended to end our marriage. She said she had believed mentorship could exist beside affection like 2 cups on the same saucer. The third major twist was quiet but total. Rhea produced emails from Capstone PR indicating Lucas had advised the firm on which internal stakeholders to pitch for upcoming scope expansions. One of the recipients was Ava. Another was a rival within brand who had been conveniently reassigned after missing a chemistry test nobody could define. The audit language used words like pattern and appearance of impropriety, which are not fireworks, but they burn longer. Miriam ended the meeting with care. She said outcomes would be communicated individually. She said support was available. She said the policy existed because power and love refused to keep each other's promises. Everyone nodded like funeral attendees who understand the weather will not delay the burial. Outside the room, the hallway was colder than it had any right to be. The green exit sign over the stairwell lit the way down to a street that was making up its mind about rain. I did not see Ava. I saw my reflection in the glass and did not look away. We separated the next day. We did not break dishes or perform a play for the neighbors. We split drawers and bank accounts like 2 accountants solving for loss. Ava moved in with a friend. I stayed in our apartment where the plant kept forgetting which direction the sun chose. In the evenings, I ran loops around the block until my thoughts were too out of breath to heckle me. I turned down offers to drink with colleagues who love you best when you are interestingly broken. HR delivered the outcomes a week later. Lucas was terminated for violation of the personal relationships policy, conflict of interest failures, and integrity issues related to expense documentation. Ava received a final written warning and was reassigned to a different org without brand influence, with compensation frozen and a development plan written in sentences that would make anyone grow up. Capstone PR was suspended pending vendor review. Rhea moved the case file into a drawer labeled closed, with a pencil so light you could forgive it for not believing in permanence. The divorce did not thunder. It negotiated. We used mediation. We used lawyers the way you use adequate shoes. There was no prenup, but nothing in dispute except the cost of our story. We settled like adults who learned that love can be real and still be a poor manager of facts. The terms are not yours to know. What is yours is this. We did it without revenge. We did it with a dignity I did not have enough of at the beginning and managed to rent along the way. Noah took me for a walk the day papers were signed. He told me to keep a list of small triumphs. Slept well. Didn't check her Instagram. Remembered to eat. Deleted a draft text full of poetic garbage. He said grief has a metabolism. You can feed it gently so it doesn't eat you alive. That night I wrote down, did not rehearse anger in the shower. It felt like getting an extra hour of daylight for free. Minor twist number 9 landed out of a clear inbox. The hotline specialist emailed to say the case would be used anonymously in policy refresh training as a good process example, not because someone did wrong, but because someone asked a question early. I cried in the kitchen and then laughed at the melodrama of it, and then cried again because melodrama is sometimes just drama that doesn't know where to sit. Release is not a trumpet. It's a door that stops resisting. Weeks later, I walked into the office as a visitor to myself and felt the building shrug. Rhea waved from a distance like a lighthouse that had done its job. Miriam sent an email about the policy refresh, clearer language around influence, stronger guidance around mentorship programs, and a call to leaders to model disclosures like they model expense hygiene. Dylan sent a note thanking contributors for engaging without spectacle. I kept my ring in a bowl near the door until the bowl learned it could be just a bowl. I learned how to cook a decent omelet. I called my mother, who said love is not a mortgage, which is a strange thing to hear when you are thinking about refinancing your sense of worth. I slept on both sides of the bed for a week because I could. In the evenings, I stood by the window and watched the green exit sign across the street thrum in the rain. I decided it was not a sign about leaving anymore. It was a sign about choosing the right door when it mattered. The last time I saw Ava, months had passed and the city had decided on summer. She looked like someone who had learned to sit with herself. We didn't hug. We didn't speak like old friends. We spoke like people who share a language they no longer need. She said she was in therapy. She said she'd joined a running group. She said she was sorry. I said I knew. I said I was learning to believe that being sorry and being forgiven are not the same motion. She nodded. We said take care, and meant it. If you want a moral, I have only this. Clean beats clever. In business, in love, in the places where the two put on each other's jackets and pretend they switch names well. Clean wins slowly, and it wins without applause, which is the only way a victory can stick to your ribs without poisoning them. I am not better for what happened. I am different in a way that makes better possible. So here is the last image I will give you. A hallway after hours, quiet as a held breath. An exit sign writing its single green word into the air. I walk past it and do not push the bar, because I am not escaping. I am arriving at the version of myself who tells the truth before he needs an audience. And here at the end, the question I cannot stop asking you and myself, the one I am placing right here inside the story where it belongs. If betrayal is exposed by policy and audit rather than rage and spectacle, does the justice feel smaller or finally big enough to live with? That is the punchline. Not a laugh, just a line that punches you gently in the chest so you remember to breathe. If you ever find yourself under an exit sign waiting for permission to become honest, consider this mine, passed to you without interest, with all the documentation the heart can bear. Grief learned my schedule and began showing up late, as if it wanted to be polite about stealing. On the mornings it arrived, I made coffee slower, watched steam become a sermon with no theology, and let the day begin without assigning it homework. I walked past the office supply closet and understood why people love paper. It listens without correcting. Ria sent me a single line months later. Pattern closed. I printed it and did not keep the printout. A private joke between a man and his impulse to archive pain. Patterns close. People continue. That's the math I can do now, without a calculator. Noah mailed me a postcard of a lighthouse with a caption that read, "Not all light warns, some invites." I taped it beside the coat rack where the empty hook had started to look like a story about failure. Hooks don't mean absence. They mean readiness. I returned the bracelet Ava left on the dresser in a small envelope with no note. The postal clerk weighed it like a quiet decision. Somewhere in the system, a barcode became responsible for the mercy I could not write in ink. Miriam and I crossed paths in the lobby. She said, "Policy is just dignity written down." I said I would remember that. She said, "Remember it before you need it." The exit sign hummed its agreement as if electricity had opinions. I started a list called Clean Wins on my phone. Items included: told the truth when it would have been easier to be vague, declined to read an old text thread, sent a thank you email to an auditor. I will never publish the list. That is why it works. When the building tested the fire alarms, the sound clawed at my ribcage and reminded me that emergencies prefer rehearsal to surprise. In the silence afterward, I learned to enjoy the absence of noise without fearing what it meant. On a bench by the canal, I watched a saxophonist play to the darkness and understood that some art is true precisely because nobody claps. The song ended when it decided to, not when an audience demanded an encore. I walked home under a sky that made room for small lives done carefully. Grief learned my schedule and began showing up late, as if it wanted to be polite about stealing. On the mornings it arrived, I made coffee slower, watched steam become a sermon with no theology, and let the day begin without assigning it homework. I walked past the office supply closet and understood why people love paper. It listens without correcting. Ria sent me a single line months later. Pattern closed. I printed it and did not keep the printout. A private joke between a man and his impulse to archive pain. Patterns close. People continue. That's the math I can do now without a calculator. Noah mailed me a postcard of a lighthouse with a caption that read, "Not all light warns, some invites." I taped it beside the coat rack where the empty hook had started to look like a story about failure. Hooks don't mean absence. They mean readiness. I returned the bracelet Ava left on the dresser in a small envelope with no note. The postal clerk weighed it like a quiet decision. Somewhere in the system, a barcode became responsible for the mercy I could not write in ink. Miriam and I crossed paths in the lobby. She said, "Policy is just dignity written down." I said I would remember that. She said, "Remember it before you need it." The exit sign hummed its agreement as if electricity had opinions. I started a list called Clean Wins on my phone. Items included: told the truth when it would have been easier to be vague, declined to read an old text thread, sent a thank you email to an auditor. I will never publish the list. That is why it works. When the building tested the fire alarms, the sound clawed at my ribcage and reminded me that emergencies prefer rehearsal to surprise. In the silence afterward, I learned to enjoy the absence of noise without fearing what it meant. On a bench by the canal, I watched a saxophonist play to the darkness and understood that some art is true precisely because nobody claps. The song ended when it decided to, not when an audience demanded an encore. I walked home under a sky that made room for small lives done carefully. Grief learned my schedule and began showing up late, as if it wanted to be polite about stealing. On the mornings it arrived, I made coffee slower, watched steam become a sermon with no theology, and let the day begin without assigning it or homework. I walked past the office supply closet and understood why people love paper. It listens without correcting. Ria sent me a single line months later. Pattern closed. I printed it and did not keep the printout. A private joke between a man and his impulse to archive pain. Patterns close, people continue. That's the math I can do now without a calculator. Noah mailed me a postcard of a lighthouse with a caption that read, "Not all light warns, some invites." I taped it beside the coat rack where the empty hook had started to look like a story about failure. Hooks don't mean absence. They mean readiness. I returned the bracelet Ava left on the dresser in a small envelope with no note. The postal clerk weighed it like a quiet decision. Somewhere in the system, a barcode became responsible for the mercy I could not write in ink. Miriam and I crossed paths in the lobby. She said, "Policy is just dignity written down." I said I would remember that. She said, "Remember it before you need it." The exit sign hummed its agreement as if electricity had opinions. I started a list called Clean Wins on my phone. Items included: told the truth when it would have been easier to be vague, declined to read an old text thread, sent a thank you email to an auditor. I will never publish the list. That is why it works. When the building tested the fire alarms, the sound clawed at my ribcage and reminded me that emergencies prefer rehearsal to surprise. In the silence afterward, I learned to enjoy the absence of noise without fearing what it meant. On a bench by the canal, I watched a saxophonist play to the darkness and understood that some art is true precisely because nobody claps. The song ended when it decided to, not when an audience demanded an encore. I walked home under a sky that made room for small lives done carefully. Grief learned my schedule and began showing up late, as if it wanted to be polite about stealing. On the mornings it arrived, I made coffee slower, watched steam become a sermon with no theology, and let the day begin without assigning it homework. I walked past the office supply closet and understood why people love paper. It listens without correcting. Ria sent me a single line months later. Pattern closed. I printed it and did not keep the printout. A private joke between a man and his impulse to archive pain. Patterns close. People continue. That's the math I can do now without a calculator. Noah mailed me a postcard of a lighthouse with a caption that read, "Not all light warns, some invites." I taped it beside the coat rack where the empty hook had started to look like a story about failure. Hooks don't mean absence. They mean readiness. I returned the bracelet Ava left on the dresser in a small envelope with no note. The postal clerk weighed it like a quiet decision. Somewhere in the system, a barcode became responsible for the mercy I could not write in ink. Miriam and I crossed paths in the lobby. She said, "Policy is just dignity written down." I said I would remember that. She said, "Remember it before you need it." The exit sign hummed its agreement as if electricity had opinions. I started a list called Clean Wins on my phone. Items included: told the truth when it would have been easier to be vague, declined to read an old text thread, sent a thank you email to an auditor. I will never publish the list. That is why it works. When the building tested the fire alarms, the sound clawed at my ribcage and reminded me that emergencies prefer rehearsal to surprise. In the silence afterward, I learned to enjoy the absence of noise without fearing what it meant. On a bench by the canal, I watched a saxophonist play to the darkness and understood that some art is true precisely because nobody claps. The song ended when it decided to, not when an audience demanded an encore. I walked home under a sky that made room for small lives done carefully. Grief learned my schedule and began showing up late, as if it wanted to be polite about stealing. On the mornings it arrived, I made coffee slower, watched steam become a sermon with no theology, and let the day begin without assigning it homework. I walked past the office supply closet and understood why people love paper. It listens without correcting. Ria sent me a single line months later. Pattern closed. I printed it and did not keep the printout. A private joke between a man and his impulse to archive pain. Patterns close. People continue. That's the math I can do now without a calculator. Noah mailed me a postcard of a lighthouse with a caption that read, "Not all light warns, some invites." I taped it beside the coat rack where the empty hook had started to look like a story about failure. Hooks don't mean absence. They mean readiness.